Welcome back, you bunch of legends. I hope you've all had a fantastic week. It's Friday, which means it's time for another installment of Friday Q&A to everybody who submitted a question this week. Thank you. I look forward to answering all of these in a few seconds. If you would like to submit a question for next week's Q&A, put them in the comment section below. And if you want to support my channel directly, there are links in the video description. Let's go. My favorite album from the hair metal era from a production standpoint. This was a good one because it made me go back and listen to some of my favorite albums and listen to them purely from the perspective of the production. When I was a teenager, seemingly discovering this forgotten style of music for the first time, I was not interested in production. I just wanted to get my hands on anything that had that kind of vibe and energy. And being someone who's a little bit older than a teenager, maybe physically a little bit older than a teenager anyway, listening to it again and having listened to how much the production really makes that vibe and that energy come across was pretty interesting. So I think basically there's one name that I isolated, which I find synonymous with the sound of 80s hair metal, and it's Michael Wagner. So pretty much everything Michael did back in the day sounds pretty awesome. The first Skid Row album, Porno Graffiti. I think he mixed No More Tears by Ozzy Osbourne, even stuff like Accept Balls to the Wall. It's just all phenomenal, and I just kind of like the way Michael went around structuring guitar sounds and capturing the raw energy and the attitude of those bands from that era. A few other notable mentions, I would have to mention Hysteria by Def Leppard. Not that I particularly love the way it sounds now, just that it is this absolute benchmark for the era. And when you listen to so much music from that era and you tell yourself, hey, they're just trying to do the Hysteria thing, suddenly a lot of bands make sense. Suddenly a lot of production makes sense from that era. So I would have to mention that one. I would also have to mention the first Lynch Mob album, I think is an amazing sounding record. And I'm going to throw Empire by Queensryche in there as well, because similarly, sounds amazing. There is this energy and attitude and atmosphere on that album. And I know Queensryche aren't considered a hair metal band, but that is just one of my favorite albums, not just from that era, but of all time. But it does have a lot of production values that I think are kind of consistent with the times. How would I go about getting a Marshall JCM 2000 style tone out of a Fractal audio product? One trick, one amp model. There's this amp model in there called the Friedman, I think the BEC45 model in there. And if you basically bring that one up, turn the depth control down a little bit, it sounds pretty similar to the red channel on a DSL. That's what I used anyway when I tone matched my DSL. I think that preset is kind of lingering around somewhere on the forum or out there on the internet, but that's for the Axe FX3. But yeah, that will get you a very similar vibe in my experience. You can experiment with any of the Friedman amp models in there, or stuff like the Cameron Atomica or the Cameron CCV. They're some of my favorite amp models in the Fractal ecosystem. Which rack unit would I suggest for somebody new to rack units? I feel like I've covered this one before, but I'm more than happy to discuss it. If we're talking rack effects, I would probably say try to grab a Lexicon MPX1, because you get an amazing sounding reverb, great sounding delays, some pretty handy modulation effects, and it's easy enough to program and use in your guitar rig. If you want something that's got analog drive-through, the Rocktron IntelliFX would be my other choice there. Some amazing 8-voice choruses, great pitch effects, some pretty handy reverbs and delays in there as well. If you wanted more of a pedalboard style thing, the Replifex is a great one to go for. So those three are usually the ones that I recommend to people. If you're looking for a rack mount preamp though, look, honestly, if you've got the money, get a Synergy system, because it is just so flexible. It's really, really easy to use with modern gear, put it that way. Aside from that, the Triaxis is going to do all the boogie things in one box. And, if you want that one sound, if you want that Michael Wagner sound we were talking about before, then, an 80A MP1 is going to do that one thing, but it's going to do that one thing really well. Voyager, great band from Perth. If you like modern prog metal with some electronic elements, some djenty elements, you haven't checked them out, you should definitely do that. Turns out Voyager were actually the first band I ever saw live when I was old enough to go and see bands. So when I turned 18, sort of the first local show I ever went to was Voyager, And another one of my favorite Perth bands, Chaos Divine. If you like kind of atmospheric prog metal as well, definitely check them out as well. And funny twist of fate, I think when I was 20 or 21, I actually auditioned to join Voyager, which obviously didn't happen. And I think they've done pretty well and made some pretty good choices since then. So probably a good choice not to hire me. Well done, Voyager. But I did get to jam a couple of my favorite songs with them, and they were all pretty cool people. And I just really remember it being a fun jam, and then me essentially being the most non-committal person on the planet. So yeah, that was kind of funny. I remember a few years after that, we were on tour. I think it was somewhere in California, and I remember seeing a Voyager. I think they were on tour with Rhapsody of Fire or something like that, like one of their posters at one of the venues we were playing at. So yeah, it's a very, very small world. Perth is a particularly small place. And if you want some modern prog to listen to, go check them out. The best way to learn songs, given that there's so much bad tablature out there, it's pretty phenomenal, I think, that there's been bad tab since the start of the internet, even before the internet. You know, if you look at what some guitar magazines published back in the day, what some published tab books had, they're not very accurate. It's not even like the fingerings are bad. Some stuff is just not accurate at all. It's poorly transcribed. But I find it amazing how the bad tab from the birth of the internet still subsists. Like, it's still out there. There's not many other things on the internet that are still kind of thriving and people are looking at. So yeah, it's kind of crazy. But I always just encourage my students to transcribe by ear with some caveats. Transcribing by ear, I think, really makes stuff stick, because you have to go through the process of not only learning the notes, but learning how you're going to play the notes. But what I would say is use all the resources available to you with the focus of learning something by ear. So set yourself the challenge, for example. Here's a good one. Figure out the vocal melodies and the harmonies from the Blue Oyster Cult song, Don't Fear the Reaper, on your guitar. There's a pretty straightforward one. It's in the key of A minor. There's only a couple of notes. The harmony notes are pretty straightforward. It's a great ear training exercise. And then you can compare that to some charts. You could compare that to, say, the way Eric Gales plays his version of that song. You can cross-reference lots of different things. If you were trying to learn like a Van Halen solo, you could get the bad internet tab. You could slow down the song on YouTube and try to figure it out by ear. You could look up some video lessons, but try not to lean too hard on any of them. Try to make it a balanced approach. Like, maybe start by ear. If you're getting nowhere, look at the bad tab. It might give you a good starting point. You can go back and try to figure out a bit more from ear. If you really get stuck, try and find a lesson online. So I think there's no right or wrong way to do it. Each approach is going to work in like different combinations or something like that. It's like making a sandwich. Like, how much bread, how much sauce, how much filling do you want? Sometimes people don't want the bread. Sometimes they don't want the sauce. But, you know, I like all three, and I find that works well for me. This is a really interesting question. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this one, and it relates to modern digital guitar gear and this kind of dissonance between it being incredibly powerful, but there being so much demand for it to accurately recreate, you know, classic analog circuit designs. And is that kind of killing innovation? It's a big question, but I think it's a pretty easy position to take that, yeah, I mean, you know, what's the point in having 300 amps and 600 stomp boxes when you only really need 3 sounds? So you're just paying for stuff you're not going to use, the old value proposition thing. And I think that might be true for some people, in which case I would say to those people, hey, get 3 Boss pedals and, you know, a Marshall JCM 2000 or a deluxe reverb and a guitar, and sit in your room and play and have fun. Make some music. Making music is fun as well, so you can double up in that regard. But that's kind of what it's about. I don't think it's killing innovation, though. I think it's facilitating fun stuff. For somebody like me, who loves to dive into tweaking effects and kind of trying to make my own effects, something like an Axe Effects makes it really easy, because I don't have a background in writing code for DSP, but there's certain sounds I would love to hear, sounds that I hear in my head and I think about and I go, how could I achieve that particular sound? And a lot of the time, once I kind of know what I want to get, in 5 or 10 minutes on Axe Edit, I can probably create it. But the big thing there is I have to know what I want. So I think the goal should always be go into something, approach a piece of gear from the perspective of what can this piece of gear suggest to me? And what do I want to get out of it? There's this feedback system in there. And I think a good piece of gear will have a very strong kind of feedback coefficient in there, and it will inspire you to make cool sounds with it, and it will inspire you to dig deeper on it. And, you know, there's been heaps of talk about user interfaces on particular designs and, you know, whether something's easy to use or not, or whether it sounds good or whether that matters or not. That's what matters to me. You know, I like having the depth of something like an Axe Effects, where if I want to take an 8-tap Plex delay and then I want to add my own feedback network to it and route some kind of modulation effect on there and then have it all controllable by the onboard modifiers, I like that. I understand that not everybody likes that, but the fact that maybe like 99% of guitar players don't want to use that, but have that feature there and get annoyed by the fact, oh, here's this thing that I never use. Keep in mind, these products have to try to keep everybody happy, you know? So just because you don't use something or just because you don't see a use for something doesn't mean that it's not useful. So I think we've actually seen an unprecedented amount of innovation when it comes to digital gear, especially when it comes to stuff like digital guitar amp modeling and effects and plugins. We should approach it from this mindset of, hey, there's new stuff. Let's see what we can do with this fun new stuff. I think it's really on the guitar players in that case. So if anyone's stifling creativity or, you know, cool new guitar noises, it's probably on all of us. So yeah, there's a good little goal. Maybe try to make one cool new guitar noise this weekend. See where it leads you. Might be fun. Have we made any progress on any new Ragdoll tunes? Not really. We haven't had any time in the studio recently. We have been really lucky to be living in WA where we can still do gigs. So we've been trying to maximize the number of gigs we can do. We've had a midweek residency, which has been really, really fun. And I got back earlier in the week from doing a remote mine site show where we got to go out and do a few gigs. And, you know, those kind of gigs pay pretty well, even though it's exhausting to be up at 5 in the morning when you're a musician and be doing a set for a bunch of shift workers at 6 in the morning and, you know, playing a bunch of your own music, playing stuff that they request, like playing Rage Against the Machine and Pantera at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday. It's kind of crazy. So yeah, we've kind of just been focusing on that. And to be honest, it's been really, really fun. We've been playing a lot of our original music. And I think because we've been playing so consistently, we've been playing pretty well, which in itself is a fun thing as well. So like I've said, for the last who knows how long, there will be new music when it's ready and when we're super happy with it. And I think when we're super happy with it, the people who like what we do will be pretty stoked with it. One last question for today. I play PRS guitars a lot, that is definitely true, but what do I think about Strats? I think Strats are okay.